Since 2000, there is only one major economy which has seen a fall in real GDP per capita: Italy. In this period, Italy has experienced a shocking fall in productivity, rising debt, and prolonged economic turmoil. We are told the Italian economy is riven by corruption, cronyism, falling birth rates, and a regional divide. Yet, to many people's surprise, one of the fastest growing economies in the past 3 years has been Italy. Is this rebound of economic growth the start of a new era, or is it just papering over long-term cracks? There are 3 reasons for the recent strong economic growth in Italy. Firstly, Italy received over €100 billion of EU funds as part of the COVID recovery plan. By 2026, Italy will receive €195 billion, the largest amount in the European Union. Secondly, the government have pursued a generous tax credit system to subsidise housing investment. Known as a super bonus 110%, it has led to a surge in housing investment, and this has caused much of a higher economic growth. By February 2024, government support had contributed upwards of €200 billion of new investment, which is equivalent to 10% of GDP. But given such a large fiscal stimulus, Italy's growth since 2019 of just 4.2% is hardly something to get too excited about. We are not seeing so much an Italian economic miracle, but continued weakness in the European economy, and Germany in particular. And don't forget that there's a strong interconnectedness between the German economy and the Italian economy, especially in manufacturing. So a German manufacturing recession will tend to filter through and hold back the Italian economy too. This year, the Bank of Italy expects growth of 0.5%. In Germany, we expect growth of minus 0.2%. But 0.5% growth is still very low. Also, whilst the stimulus boosted growth in the short term, the key question is whether this will help to tackle the underlying productivity crisis which has hit the Italian economy in the past 20 years. Since 2000, Italian productivity, the output per worker, has slumped behind its main competitors. Another problem behind this fiscal stimulus is that it has led to a budget deficit around 7.4% of GDP, nearly double the EU average. And this is a concern given Italy's record high levels of debt to GDP. Italy is already paying a calamitous 8.2% of revenue on debt. However, there are 2 pieces of good news. Firstly, Italian bond yields have come down much closer to German levels. This is due to both low inflation and also market predictions the Eurozone is moving closer towards common bond market. Secondly, despite the fiscal stimulus and high deficit, the high levels of Italian debt have recently fallen from 155 to 137% of GDP. Now, this is still one of the highest in the developed world, but at least it is moving in the right direction. However, it does limit Italy's ability to continuously promote economic growth through fiscal stimulus. Now, the fall in debt does partly reflect that with higher economic growth, you get more tax revenues, and at least with some growth, this is starting to improve. And this leads us on to a factor which really hobbled the Italian economy in the 2010s. After the financial crisis, the Italian economy had a double-dip recession. The first recession was caused by the global credit crunch. The second was more self-inflicted, as membership of the Eurozone and soaring bond yields caused Italy to pursue spending cuts and austerity. In a time of economic slowdown, this made the economy even worse. At least Italy seems to be learning that austerity in a recession only makes things worse. However, there is much more to Italy's poor performance in the past 20 years than austerity. Firstly, the slowdown started in 2000, just as Italy entered the Eurozone and adopted the common currency. Now, some claim this is a coincidence, but it isn't. There are some real costs to the Italian economy. In the post-war period, Italian inflation was often higher than other countries. And to maintain competitiveness, Italy relied on frequent devaluations in the lira to restore competitiveness. But once you're in the euro, you can't devalue, you can't set interest rates, and therefore this easier option was not available. But Italy continued to have higher costs, falling productivity, but without the ability to devalue, it just led to lower demand, a soaring current account deficit, and higher debt. Not only that, but in the euro, Italy lost control of monetary policy and bond yields soared. Now the good news is that Italy is starting to adjust to the eurozone. After 20 years in the euro, it knows that it can't rely on devaluation and high inflation. And in fact, one of the successes of recent years is keeping inflation much lower than other European countries, and it's currently really quite low. And this is despite a reliance on natural gas and being particularly hard hit by the Ukraine war and the surge in gas prices. In Italy, wholesale gas prices were amongst the highest in Europe, but consumers have been largely protected, been insulated by a highly regulated electric market. Prices fell 10% last year and are likely to fall 20% this year, and that's definitely helped avoid some of the problems facing, say, Germany. However, what about all the long-term problems of the Italian economy? Have these been resolved by government fiscal stimulus? For example, the economist Bruno Pellegrino argues that a key factor behind the poor economic performance in Italy is a high degree of nepotism and cronyism, which has led to poor quality management. He argues that Italian firms often rely on cronyism and local connections rather than promoting on the basis of meritocracy. And this poor quality management leads to inflexibility and a lack of dynamism, and a key factor behind the low productivity growth. Now, Italy has the second largest manufacturing sector in Europe, but the global economy is fast changing, and it struggled to respond to the influx of cheap Chinese manufactured imports and recently the US-led subsidies on green energy. It also has a much higher share of small firms who are getting left behind, especially in industries like IT, dominated by large multinationals. Also, another factor that undoubtedly contributed to low growth in Italy was the political turmoil, especially of the Berlusconi era, where governments were sidetracked by scandals and votes of no competence. Italy has had 68 governments in 77 years, making it more difficult to introduce long-term policies which promote real economic reform and real economic growth. Although you could say there are some signs of greater stability in recent months. Another long-term issue which is really problematic for Italy is the decline in the working age population. Italy has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, and it's aging quicker than many of their competitors. It faces one of the highest pension burdens in the OECD. 16% of Italian GDP goes on pensions, and this is likely to grow as the population continues to age. And this is a large fiscal burden on the Italian government, which limits its ability to spend on more productive areas of the economy. Even the recent fall in unemployment more reflects a shortage of workers than any significant long-term improvement in the economy. Not only do Italy have a shrinking base of young workers, but they also have one of the lowest rates of education in Europe. It has the second highest rate of young people not in employment, education or training, behind only Romania. The perceived poor quality of higher education deters young people from entering university, creating a cycle of low skills that prevents upward mobility. In fact, young people are leaving Italy in droves. 10% of highly educated Italians live abroad, one of the highest rates in the developed world. Now, not everything is bad. Life expectancy is still good in Italy. Life quality is very reasonable. Italians have remained relatively unfazed by the stagnating economy and stagnating wages. And it raises the interesting question of who has the best living standards: Europe with long holidays and a welfare state, or the United States with much higher incomes, but people have to work much harder with little welfare state to back you up.